Welcome home. We are
Just trying to.
WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We are Baltimore positive. We are positively out on the road all summer long doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. It's all brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I will have the Back to the Future scratch offs. We have had some rock and rollers and some 80s musicians out on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. Last year, my friend Thomas Dolby joined me for some breakfast to talk about his book and an 80s tour last year. And if you remember, follow me on social media. I drove all the way to Cleveland for the last night of what was a tour with Modern English and Thomas Dolby and a whole bunch of bands. And Thomas didn't like hearing this, especially after I carried and muled all of his equipment back to Baltimore after the show, which was the last night of the tour. I said, Wang Chung, they were fantastic. They were my favorite part of the night. So when I found out that I knew some publicists who knew some publicists who even knew Judas Priest and said, can you get Jack Hughes from Wang Chung on? He's like, sure, I can do that with you. So from an old 1980s music critic at the Baltimore Sun, we welcome Jack Hughes from Wang Chung on. I tried to chase you guys down backstage just to get a picture in Cleveland at that beautiful Blossom out in the middle of the woods, and I never saw you. I was so disappointed, but it is a pleasure to have you on, and it's great to have you guys back at Wolf Trap in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that, and it was great. That show at Blossom was great. Such a great venue.
For you being out on the road at this point, 40 years later, my first question to any musician of the 80s, videos, I saw you at Merriweather Post Pavilion back in the 1980s with Dance All Days and Let's Go, and those songs just came out. All these years later, to be able to go out, see crowds, big crowds, you're out with Rick Springfield, you're out with John Waite, as well as Paul Young, playing the music that you love and seeing the reaction that you get, not just from people my age that love Dance All Days and loved all of that stuff 40 years ago, but by people's children. It's just such a wide variety of people that the 80s have become nostalgia, I guess, the way the 50s were for me as a kid when Happy Days was on television, but really enjoying your music and exploring your music.
It is a great feeling, that young demographic, like you say, is great to see at the shows. I think with Wang Chung, obviously we had all our success in the 80s, but it sort of continued through video games like Grand Theft Auto. Dance All Days was in that, and then The Walking Dead picked up a song called Space Junk that we did in the 90s. That was in their episode one, season one, episode one. It closed that first episode. And then I think that we're going to be in Grand Theft Auto 6 as well. The trailers feature Everybody Have Fun Tonight anyway. So yeah, it's great how the music just keeps regenerating. And then of course we've had some great movie syncs as well. So great. But the being out on tour and being able to play these songs to the fans is just fabulous.
Well, you story told a little bit last year, and I don't want to steal your thunder for those who are going to go down to Wolf Trap on the 6th of July and see you. Maybe to Atlantic City, you're playing in Bethlehem, you're playing a bunch of places in the area. I would send everybody out to the I Want My 80s tour, 1980s tour. It's Rick Springfield, John Waite, Paul Young, and I'm with Jack Hughes from Wang Chung as well. To live and die in LA, I remember renting videos and movies and how much product placement began in the 80s and Tom Cruise with the sunglasses and Risky Business, that soundtrack music and even, what other bands have done, since then, you were sort of on the front end of let's make a song for a movie. Let's be a part of that. And the 80s, it really spawned a lot of bands.
Mm, that's true. I think with To Live and Die in LA though, it was the fact that we were asked to do the entire score, and to write instrumental music to score the movie, rather than just doing a song. In fact, Bill Friedkin, when he first spoke to me, was quite adamant that he didn't want a song. He wanted just instrumental stuff. So that's what we supplied first off. But it was after I saw the movie that I wrote the song. And I say I wrote the song just kind of came out because I was aware that he didn't want a song. I thought I'm kind of wasting my time with this, but we demoed it, sent it over to placement. I don't know, with Wang Chung, we weren't so much into that, but certainly movies were a huge part of our career success.
Well, you broke up a little bit for me, so I lost the middle bit of that story there a little bit.
Mm,
But you said you had seen the movie and then the song came out of you, To Live and Die in LA, correct?
that's correct, yeah. So as I said, Bill Friedkin asked us to do instrumental music for the movie based on a song of ours called Wait, which is on Points on the Curve. And so that's what we did first. But we didn't see the movie before we wrote all that stuff. So that kind of opening scene with the money printing and all that, which syncs so amazingly, is complete serendipity that it all fitted together in the way that it did, you know. But like I say, he flew us out to LA to see this rough cut of the movie, and I was so blown away by it when I got back to the UK. The song just kind of came out. Sometimes as a songwriter, you feel like you're just channeling, really. You're not actually writing so much, you know. And all aspects of that project were just a beautiful sense of being in the right place at the right time.
Jack Hues is our guest from Wang Chung. They're out on tour and making their music and doing their thing. It seems to me that everybody I talk to is musicians, sort of my age, our age. I grew up with your music, and I think about the pressures of that time in life
Mm.
of having a hit, having an album. I worked in a record store, so and trying to sell albums and get radio and get on MTV and do
Mm-hmm.
all that. Writing a song like "To Live and Die in LA," trying to maybe not necessarily write a hit, but have that in mind that I want to hear this on the radio. Everything that sort of comes in this century is a little bit different. And I think as
Yeah.
I meet musicians who are older, have been doing this their whole lives, it's like, I
Mm.
don't need to write hit records anymore. I write what I write, but I think it does lend itself to a different kind of art, maybe later in life, especially once you master your instrument and master your craft, maybe in a way that you didn't 40 years ago.
Well, I agree with that. You know, I've been working not for the last, well, in 2020, I released a solo album, a double album. 21, I did another one during the pandemic, and I'm about to release a third solo album. So solo albums are a way for me to sort of explore avenues that are sort of beyond Wang Chung, if you like. You know, it's more in the realm of progressive rock, I suppose. You know, in the UK, there's a magazine, Prog magazine, and they follow me and do articles on me. You know? So that's kind of nice. I like that, and that's a refresher to come back to Wang Chung and deal with more of the sort of nostalgic aspects of Wang Chung. You know?
Well, I mean, and Wang Chung, I guess it's not insulting to call it a nostalgic act or a nostalgic
Uh-uh.
tour. And I think for me with Thomas last year, because he hadn't been out in a few years, and he was a headliner, and he talked about Sirius XM and host and keeping the music alive, and I
Mm-hmm.
hear all of your music everywhere. It's ubiquitous to me, being a child of that era and growing up in that era. But then I come to an event that's a festival that where they have running water in bathrooms, unlike the ones on the beaches and some other places where it's more weather related. Tell me about this tour a little bit, and Rick Springfield and John Waite. I saw John Waite maybe 2 years ago. I've seen Rick Springfield on and off, and he pops up and again, and Paul Young. I hear all of your songs, but this is a lovely night. By the way, Wolf Trap, for those who don't know and have never been to Wolf Trap, people ask me about it. Where is it? It's not nearly that far from Baltimore where we are, but it's lovely. It's out in the woods. It's in a national park. And it's a beautiful night of music. But getting there early and having all 4 or 5 artists, in the case of last summer, there were 8 or 9 artists, to get there early and really make a whole evening of it. No offense, but 3 hours of Wang Chung music in a club one night might lend itself to a much smaller audience. That it's just it's more festive, and I felt that way about your music, about all of the bands. And this seems to me to be the best way to present it in the summertime, to come out with a bunch of different bands every summer and get a taste of it. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to come down and see you guys at Wolf Trap.
That's cool. I think that does work. You know, previously, I think we've been on tours where there are arguably too many bands, you know, so the audience are really watching the changeover most of the time, you know. So the nice thing about this tour is there's four bands. We each get a sort of half hour, 35 minutes, which enables like us to be able to play To Live and Die in LA, for example. We usually do that most nights, and as well as the well-known hits. In fact, everything we play is a hit. You know, we sometimes do the stuff from the Breakfast Club, and then there's the Hypnotize Me from Inner Space. So we mix up our set night by night, you know, to make it a bearable process. You know? But I think the experience of seeing Paul Young, you know, he has all these hits. He's a great guy, you know, a very warm kind of. He's the glue on this tour in many ways, you know, and I think the audience just feel very relaxed with that. And then we come out and like bang it basically, you know, and the audience are on their feet and going pretty crazy. John Waite, I'm in awe of. You know, I mean, he's a rock singer. He's a rock star from his head to his toes, you know, and the way he sings, I don't know how he does it night after night, you know, because he's really rips his throat, and you know, and then Rick comes out. Rick's just a total rock star, you know, and so I think people get this really high energy evening. They get enough of the bands to really have a sense of like what they are, but you, as you say, you get the variety, so that you have a real '80s experience.
Jack, I was 15 years old, got my first job in the summer of '84. I
Mm.
worked at a record store at East Point Mall called Sound Waves. And I was the youngest person there by a lot. So there's some older folks there, in their 20s. They were older and had seen Zeppelin in their prime and things like that.
Oh yes.
So this is '84, and I fell in love with Dance Hall Days, and I spun your album. Whenever I got to play the album in the store that we got to play on our 8-hour shift there on our feet, and
Uh-huh.
saying to people, "Can I help you find Merle Haggard in the mall or whatever they were looking for?" His albums and
Yeah.
CDs were. There was one little pile in the corner. It was right in the beginning. They only had the Cars and Billy Joel and a couple of other ones at that point on
Yeah.
CBS. But I love Dance Hall Days from the beginning,
Hmm.
and to see you last summer. And I went out to see Thomas, and I saw the other bands, and I've always liked your band, whatever. But I'm with you. People get up and they move, and if they haven't seen you or interacted with your half an hour, 45 minutes of the world during the show,
Hmm.
it was my favorite part of the set. Thomas didn't want to hear that, but
No.
and it reminded me of how much I love your songs.
Well,
And
that's
you wrote some
cool.
great songs, man. You really did.
Thank you, man. Yeah. Well, I think, with Wang Chung, we present as a sort of rock band. We're playing, I do improvise solos, which some nights come off, some nights don't, but that's all part of it, I think, And I know, I mean, Thomas did a great show, I thought, but he is using laptops and, it's harder to fathom what's going on when a guy's just standing there pressing buttons and stuff. Not that I have a problem with that, but it's harder to present that as something compelling, So I think with Wang Chun, yeah, certainly we added a kind of rock and roll boost to that whole tour.
Well, Thomas had all of that Live Aid video with
Yeah,
David
yeah,
Bowie, and I had seen him do that with Todd Rundgren down at Ramshead as
amazing.
sort of a one night he tried it out. It made me cry. I mean, I'm sitting
Uh-huh.
at Ramshead, I'm sobbing, and then he brought it to the big stage, and he kind of told me what he was doing without too much.
Mm.
But I think all of you '80s artists that brought so much joy to all of us in MTV and whatever nostalgia, I don't feel bad about it at all. I'm gonna put some coolies in the trunk. We're gonna come down. We're gonna have a few beers. We're gonna spend the night listening to your music. And well, let's see. When you, and everyone we knew could believe, do, and share in what was true. So there it is.
Yes.
Some music, some good music. Jack
Yeah.
Hughes is here from Wang Chung. You've made some new music as well and had an album this year. Talk about where the band is right now, above and beyond just coming to see you. That
Hmm.
you could buy a T-shirt, you can do all of that, but you are an active band.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, and we have a new album out. It's a retrospective, so it's all about the past in a way. But it's you can buy it as a double vinyl album or a double CD. Album one is the hits from "Don't Let Go," which was our first single in America, through to "Space Junk," which, as I said, was in the Walking Dead in the 2000s. And then the second album is some rarities, some tracks that weren't released for albums at the time. There's the demo of Dancehall Days and the demo of To Live and Die in LA, and they're quite interesting to listen to in a sort of archaeological sort of way. And then we finish up that album with a remix of Everybody Have Fun Tonight by Eric Cupper, which came out earlier this year.
Well, everybody will have fun on July 6th. The show is down at Wolf Traps at the Filene Center. One of my favorite venues, certainly one of my favorite venues to drive to. We're so blessed here with Merriweather.
Yeah.
Last week I saw Simple Minds there. I get to go down to Wolf Trap. It's July 6th. Mark it down. If you can't make it that night, they're going to be playing up at the Hard Rock Hotel in Atlantic City as well. Newark, New Jersey on the 12th. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania at the Wind Creek Event Center. I saw the Black Crows there last year. Beautiful Bethlehem. It's in the old steel mill there. It's beautiful.
Mm.
That's July 13th. So a bunch of chances to see Wang Chung, to see Rick Springfield, to see John Waite and Paul Young. And I've seen all of these bands at many points at many times. But Jack Hughes has been kind enough to give me 10 minutes in a hotel room somewhere in the middle of Indiana. And
Absolutely.
I am grateful, and I've always loved your music, and it's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, I really appreciate it, man. I like where you're coming from.
There you go, man. Let's go back to the eight. My buddy Tommy Conwell from Tommy Conwell and the Young Rumblers, one of his catchphrases when he's got his thing is, the '80s are coming back, baby. They're coming back. So the '80s are coming back. That's why I grew my
Absolutely.
hair out. Take your baby by the wrist, right? There you go.
Absolutely. I'll take your baby by the hair.
Hair. There you go. There you go. I am Nestor. We are WN. I feel like I'm singing with Wang Chung. This is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Karaoke with Jack. There we go.
Yeah.
Back for more on Baltimore Positive. Stay with us.